Root cause of reality. You cannot understand the nature of the present if you ignore the actual truth of history. Most people look at the morning news like it just fell out of the sky overnight. They treat events as isolated anomalies, random sparks without a fuse. But nothing in human society exists in a vacuum. Everything happening right now is the direct, unbroken continuation of decisions, conflicts, systems, and compromises established decades or centuries ago. If you cut off the root, the tree doesn't make any sense. We have this terrible habit of compartmentalizing the past. We treat historical eras like sealed museum display cases. Ancient history over here, the industrial age over there, the post-war era tucked into another corner. It is clean, organized, and totally false. History isn't a row of neat, disconnected boxes. It's an ongoing, messy river. Every policy debate, every geopolitical fracture, and every cultural friction point we navigate right now flows straight from that current. When you strip history of its actual context, you lose the ability to decode human behavior. People start reacting to surface symptoms instead of root causes. Take modern political structures or financial systems. None of them were engineered yesterday by a committee operating with a clean slate. They are stacks of legacy code, layers of fixes, power grabs, and emergency patches slapped over older frameworks. When an institution acts in a bizarre, counterproductive way today, it's rarely random. It is almost always doing exactly what it was designed to do 100 years ago, under completely different pressures. The continuation is always paved by the actuality. Not the romanticized myths we tell ourselves about how things were, but the raw, unvarnished record of what people actually did. When communities or entire nations build their identity on sanitized fables, they lose their bearings. They expect current dynamics to resolve neatly based on ideals that were never genuinely practiced in the first place. You end up applying fairy tale solutions to hard-nosed historical momentum, and seeing it any other way makes the future exponentially more complicated. If your baseline map of the present is distorted, every projection you make about tomorrow is going to miss the mark. Think about trying to plot a navigation course. If you refuse to accept your true starting coordinates because you prefer a prettier map, your trajectory will be wildly off. You end up surprised by obvious outcomes. You get blindsided by patterns that have repeated themselves for generations. Look at how economic tensions flare up. Sudden shifts in labor power, inflation shocks, or housing shortages rarely happen by pure chance. They are the downstream results of decades-old tax codes, zoning mandates, demographic shifts, and monetary policies. When people treat an economic crunch as an unprecedented freak accident, they propose short-term band-aids that often make the core structural imbalance worse. They try to treat a 40-year structural buildup with a 6-month news cycle fix. The same thing happens in international relations. Border disputes, trade alliances, and ideological proxy fights do not materialize out of thin air because two leaders had a bad meeting last Tuesday. They are grounded in treaties signed in distant centuries, displaced populations, colonial partitions, and long-standing geographic realities. When people treat an economic crunch as an unprecedented freak accident, they propose short-term band-aids that often make the core structural imbalance worse. They try to treat a 40-year structural buildup with a 6-month news cycle fix. When commentators analyze these conflicts purely through the lens of the last 24 hours, the analysis falls apart immediately. It looks like sheer madness because the entire premise has been severed from its lineage. We do this in our personal lives and workplace cultures too. Every team, family, and organization carries unwritten rules forged during past crises. Someone joined 15 years ago, implemented an awkward workaround to survive an emergency, and left. Now, newcomers follow the workaround without knowing why. That's just how we do things here. That is history in miniature, past necessity hardening into present ritual. If you don't investigate why the process exists, you waste energy fighting ghosts. Denying historical continuity also breeds a strange modern arrogance. We tend to assume that because our technology is faster and our gadgets are smaller, human nature has fundamentally evolved beyond previous constraints. It hasn't. The emotional drivers, fear, greed, status-seeking, territoriality, tribal loyalty, are identical to what they were 2,000 years ago. The tools change, the players don't. Believing we are exempt from the historical cycles of overreach and correction is pure hubris. Understanding the actual past isn't about wallowing in nostalgia or assigning endless blame. It's about basic diagnostic clarity. A doctor cannot treat a chronic illness without knowing the patient's medical history. Asking a doctor to fix a condition while banning any mention of what happened prior to this morning is absurd. Yet that is precisely how we attempt to run modern civic discourse. We demand instant fixes while actively avoiding the backstory. When you start viewing the present as an active continuum, the noise clears up. You stop getting shocked by things that are entirely predictable. You realize that power dynamics rarely shift overnight, that cultural trust takes centuries to build and seconds to break, and that every right or privilege currently enjoyed was paid for through specific, documented friction. You develop a longer view. You stop panicking over daily headlines because you can trace the arc. Ignoring this continuity guarantees that the future becomes a minefield of unintended consequences. When policymakers design interventions without studying the historical precedents of similar laws, they walk right into traps that were thoroughly mapped out by previous generations. They repeat the exact same policy failures with identical predictable outcomes, acting shocked every single time. It is a staggering waste of collective energy. Seeing things clearly requires work. It demands reading past the headlines, digging into boring records, and confronting uncomfortable facts that don't fit into clean political slogans. It means accepting that our current reality is deeply constrained by what came before, whether we like it or not. The past isn't dead and buried. It is currently running the machinery in the background. The continuum doesn't stop moving just because someone chooses not to look at it. The momentum of yesterday is shaping this exact second, and what we do right now is already locking in the parameters of tomorrow. If you want a real grip on where things are heading, put down the crystal ball and start looking at the foundation. Let me conclude with 2 verses from the Quran. Similar situations came to pass before you, so travel throughout the earth and see what was the end of those who denied the truth. Surah Ali Imran. Have they not traveled through the land and observed how was the end of those before them? They were more numerous than themselves and greater in strength and in impression on the land. But whatever they used to earn did not avail them. Surah Ghafir. Knowledge is king.